Kyle, thank you for taking time to be on the Bitcoin Source. Can you first start off by introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is Kal Kassa. I'm an Ethiopian Bitcoiner. For the past 2 years and some change, I've been talking about Bitcoin and how it could support countries like Ethiopia, support developing countries, or I guess now we call them countries in the global south, escape inflation and some of the ills of their local currencies. So I'm an educator. I talk about Bitcoin. I talk about some of the other currencies that haven't really been good for us, and some of the cryptocurrencies that are what I think are scams and failures.
Most definitely. Thank you, Kyle, for that introduction. So, Kyle, like, what are some of, books, courses, or even people in the ecosystem that might have helped you to become a better Bitcoiner and source your Bitcoin knowledge?
Sure. So I think early on I was reading Saifedean Ammous and Andreas Antonopoulos, Jimmy Song. I think these are authors, Bitcoiners that are very true to their signal. They have a lot of signal, not as much noise. And so, I recommend for, any students that kind of are jumping into this field, trying to understand Bitcoin, to look into those three authors. And if you start there, everything else gets easier.
Yes, most definitely. Shout out to Jimmy Song. I actually interviewed him. He's a true Bitcoiner. I've learned a lot from him, and I just think he's a great guy. So Kyle, I know that you talked about this on like Bitcoin Magazine, some other podcasts, but I've always been very interested, as an African, first generation American and coming from African descent. I was always curious to know about your journey. So can you talk about your journey moving from Ethiopia to Texas and how Bitcoin has become like a laser focus of yours in a mission since you've been in America?
Yeah. Well, so the whole reason I moved to Texas in 2020 was because of the lockdowns, right? So Texas at that time was one of the only kind of free places in the world, I would say. Not only that, but Austin has a great kind of Bitcoin center. It has great meetups. It has great people and community around it. And so, that decision to leave Ethiopia, it came very easy, and it also led to my rabbit hole, because that year the Ethiopian currency lost a lot of value. Ethiopia was in the middle of a civil war, and for almost 3 weeks in June of 2020, all of Ethiopia, this is 110 million people, did not have access to the internet. And so, you had the Wi-Fi and 3G, 4G networks going down. You had the currency being devaluated. And it was at that time the engine started turning, and I said, all right, let's, what are some ways to save my value, right? And that's kind of how this Bitcoin thesis kind of came in me, and I travel back and forth to Ethiopia now, and I share the word, and I think it's getting some good reception. And it's also been a very good year for us to learn about all of the other kind of failures in the industry, right? And so with FTX collapsing, and a lot of the other tokens kind of showing their true face, I think it's a great time for the education of it all. And me being in Texas, I think it's adding a great deal to my own education.
Most definitely, and I think it's really paramount too. Like, you mentioned the civil war in Ethiopia. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was around 2020, 2019. That was around the time that was happening.
Yeah, yeah. It escalated, and I think in November 2020, that's when some barracks in the north were hit. And thankfully now we're at a peace. Been I want to say a peace treaty of some sort, kind of a call for arms, and it seems like the main people involved are now working together. There was a few formal agreements. I want to say one in Nairobi, another one in Pretoria, that have been signed. So Ethiopia seems to be at peace now.
Most definitely. And I think, with the pandemic and with COVID, it kind of was amplified. And, I love the fact that you were actually able to get out of the country. A lot of people have difficulty doing so. And what I find very interesting, and this kind of segues to my next question, is you have so many eyes, so many people looking at the potential of Africa as far as digital infrastructure and digital assets. So, for example, Visa is pledging to invest $1 billion into Africa by 2027. And that leads me to believe and think about some cryptocurrencies and protocols that are kind of heavily invested in the country, Cardano being one of them. I know that you've had some videos on YouTube where you talk about Cardano and a lot of its major flaws and failures in, as far as a store of value and kind of liberating Africans like, Cardano has been pitching. So, what do you say to people that believe Cardano is more efficient than Bitcoin and it can scale better, and why Ethiopians should focus on Bitcoin only?
Sure. So, you know, you can look at, the facts, right? You could look at Bitcoin being truly decentralized. You can look at Bitcoin having a proof of work, which um, I think we can somewhat agree is very much superior to proof of stake. Um, and uh, and you can look at some of their promises in Ethiopia. So 2018 is when they first arrived. So this was, 4, almost 5 years ago now, and still they're pushing the blame. So they're saying, "Hey, look, we've delivered what we've delivered. Now it's up to the Ethiopian government to implement." Right. So they keep, kind of pushing the goal mark, and so, I would say no. Cardano is not at all comparable to Bitcoin. And what we'll see is just a continued failure. We've seen failure in their price, right? So I think when I gave that lecture in early of 2020, their price was around a dollar or so. Now they're struggling below 30 cents. And I think that's going to continue to happen as this contagion kind of moves through the market. And then you can look at other economies like Central African Republic. They were looking at two different solutions, Bitcoin being one, Sango being another. And I think just this week they were saying, well, there's not enough interest in Sango, right? So they blamed it on two reasons. One, the market is not in a good spot, and two, the investor interest has been dying out. So, I think things are just going to naturally move into Bitcoin. And, even me, when I was learning about this place or this space, I hate to say space, it's really a Bitcoin or nothing at all kind of conversation for me. But when I was learning about Bitcoin, I did fall into some of the other traps. I, bought Ethereum at some point and some of those other shit coins. But I think time is teaching us a valuable lesson. I want to say 2 weeks ago, Paxful, Ray Youssef, right? They've pledged to take Ethereum off of their marketplace, right? And so we're going to just continue seeing news like this. And so yeah, the crypto or the Cardano guys are slowly just going to lose their appeal.
And what's very interesting is that you have some naysayers that will say, "Oh, Kal is disgruntled. He's claiming that Cardano is not, it's not centralized. It's actually decentralized, and Bitcoin can't scale." And I've seen some comments under like some of the speeches that you've made on it. And like, what do you have to say to those people that think that you're disgruntled because Charles didn't keep his word or actually complete his mission that he's still working on with Cardano in Africa? Like, what do you say to that? Because some people might just say that Cardano hasn't really achieved what you believe Bitcoin has achieved. And in my personal opinion, I think that anytime you're dealing with a protocol or a cryptocurrency that has a face to it, it has a CEO, it has a founder, it has a team, it has a set of you know board members or whatever the case may be, there's always the opportunity for manipulation or corruption or coercion. So, like for me personally, I think that Bitcoin has one job and one job only, which is decentralization, freedom, money, and a store of value. But I just want to kind of clear the air for the audience to, that might see some of your videos and think that, you're just ranting about Cardano, and just give your take on why you think Bitcoin is actually a whole lot better.
Absolutely. Well, you might be able to say, "Look, I am disgruntled," right? When someone comes into your country, I was living at that time in Ethiopia for 8 years. I was working as an advisor. I had, some kind of contact with them, and it's very sad to see, right? Empty promises, right? Somebody fly in and um, uh, instead of approaching the conversation with Bitcoin and open source decentralized technologies that can really support people, take back their own value, instead start off with a scam of Cardano, ADA token. I think that's a very troubling thing to see. So there is a lot of I am upset, right? And I think we'll just have kind of time kind of tell us what the conclusion will be. I think that conclusion is coming clearer and clearer every day. And of course I wish their team the best, and I hope nothing but great things for their community. But I think it's very clear that their token and their technologies are not there. I think that the technical term is vaporware.
And Ethiopia is a beautiful country, and I think that it has a huge amount of potential as far as, onboarding people to this digital asset, this digital revolution that we're going through. But of course, with most central banks and governments, they're kind of nervous about Bitcoin. It's a new technology, it's kind of a disruptive technology. And I know that Ethiopia initially banned cryptocurrency in the country, and then they kind of like reversed their decision on that hostile take on crypto being illegal or nefarious. So, are Ethiopians seeking alternatives to their weaker currency because of, the government banning it, or are they more focused on trying to have a store of value or giving remittances for people that are outside of the country so they can bring actual money back into the country? Like, I know you live there, so I want to hear your takes on, what are Ethiopians actually utilizing and focusing on Bitcoin for?
Sure. So, well, Ethiopians, I think, are most utilizing the dollar. So, to retain their wealth, they're going to move as much of their local currency, the Ethiopian birr, into the United States dollar, and that's just been, that's been very natural for an Ethiopian that can at least, afford to do that. And so now the issue with that is one, the dollar is essentially illegal in Ethiopia unless you have the proper allowances and licenses. You're this big company and you have foreign assets and things like this. A normal Ethiopian can't walk into a bank and exchange their Ethiopian birr for the United States dollar. So that creates a secondary market, a kind of they call it a black market. Some advocates on Twitter will call this the real market. And so what that does is it creates a premium for the dollar. So right now the dollar stands at a 70 or 75% premium. So what that means is if you go to a bank and you're able to get the allowances from the government, then you can buy $1 for 54 Ethiopian birr. Now, there's not a lot of liquidity there, and like I said, there are a lot of kind of laws and red tape. But if you go to the neighborhood broker, right, the black market, you can buy $1 for around 90 to 95 Ethiopian birr, which just shows the amount of demand for the dollar. And so that's kind of been our safe haven or safest asset. And then from there, people might buy property. That too, retains its wealth, its value, at least on par to the dollar. People might venture into gold. Gold has been very culturally significant for Ethiopians, much like Indians and things like this. It's what you would give at weddings and things like this. So Bitcoin plays a big piece in that, but it takes a great deal of education to understand why gold is not necessarily a good medium of exchange, right? Why the U.S. dollar over the longer term, right, 1970 or so has been a depreciating currency, hasn't really been good for retaining wealth. So it's going to take a great deal of education to kind of share with Ethiopians that this is a better, more pristine asset. And so I think the majority of Ethiopians will get there. There are some peer-to-peer marketplaces. Paxful is there, Local Bitcoins is there. There are some meetups. Remittance, I think you just mentioned that now. That's going to be a big way for Ethiopians to build up their or stack their sats, because it doesn't make sense to give 8 or 10% of that remittance to Western Union, right?
Yeah.
When you can pay zero and send it over through one of these apps. And I think even Strike is now working in more countries. Machan Kura is doing kind of USSD technology. So there's a wealth of ways for Ethiopians to now buy Bitcoin in peer-to-peer markets. And then also what I think will happen is you'll have more Ethiopians begin working for Bitcoin. So, a lot of Ethiopians are young, and internet connection and smartphones and whatnot are more accessible in the rural regions. So I think you'll have Ethiopians log into it's kind of like those marketplaces for jobs and gig work, the gig economy. I think that's going to be kind of the next iteration of our adoption. So even if the government doesn't look at it, even if our ministers don't think of this as kind of an appropriate way to do business, I think that's fine, because essentially this is a peer-driven initiative, and our Ethiopians will slowly understand this and quickly adopt this.
Yes, and Bitcoiners always love to say, slowly then suddenly. And then you have countries like you have Nigeria, which is really big on the Bitcoin ecosystem, and they're really trying to push and change some laws to get things happening in that country. Like you said, Cal, there's a lot of young people in the country, and they're really tech savvy, and they're focused on finding ways to trade value, right? And secure value, whether it's through digital assets or just peer-to-peer transactions. So do you think in the future or later down the road, will that actually help deregulation, or at least, pushing it towards getting legal tender in Ethiopia?
Yeah, I mean the legal tender conversation is a big one. And of course, I hope it happens. I'm pushing for that to happen. Uh, uh, and so yeah, I'm hopeful that it will happen. But even if it doesn't, there's nothing keeping an Ethiopian right now from keeping us Sats in a hardware wallet, or hot wallet, cold wallet, whatever it may be. So yeah, legal adoption will help, but sometimes those negotiations with IMF and World Bank, it's very tough to say no. And so yeah, and also there's building consensus amongst government is a very difficult thing to do. So if you were to ask 10 people, 10 ministers in Ethiopia how they feel about Bitcoin, you're going to get 10 different answers, ranging from kind of their exposure to it. And they're generally a little on the older side, and they value, fiat or state-led currency. So, that conversation, I hope Ethiopia looks to the example of El Salvador. But even if they don't, I think there's nothing keeping Ethiopians and peers from adopting successfully.
Ethiopians or people in Africa will be watching the show. And pretty much what Cal is saying is that Bitcoin is open source. It allows you to make cross border payments without the approval of a centralized entity, a government, a bank, an overlord, a tribal leader. It doesn't really matter. And this is the beauty of the Bitcoin protocol, where if I feel compelled to send Cal some Bitcoin, I can send that to him through the Lightning Network or through Strike or Manchankora or Cash App, and he would get this in less than 10 minutes. and he could use this money to do whatever he wants. He can store it as Bitcoin, he can transfer it into fiat and use that on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't really matter. And this is the revolution that we're seeing now in the ecosystem, where before this, money always had a gatekeeper. You couldn't just take money and transfer it somewhere. You had to wait 3 to 5 business days. You had to get a fee taken out. You had to get a signature of approval or a deposit check for it. So this is the beauty of Bitcoin, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm just so glad to have Kal on here to really give the scoop and give the rail on what it's like on the ground in Ethiopia, what it's like in Africa for people trying to onboard Bitcoin into their lives. So Kal, to wrap this up, thank you for being on the Bitcoin Source. Can you give people your social media handles and any future endeavors that you might want people to know about?
Sure. I'm on Twitter. That's probably the best way to contact me. And I think you wrapped it up very well. And when I look at Ethiopia, I think the hope or where the future might take us will be in mining for Bitcoin. I really think that's going to be a great value add for both the country and the Bitcoin network. I think companies like Gridless are venturing
Yeah.
on this in Kenya. And they raised some money. They're going to be starting some pilot projects around some rural areas in Kenya. But that same model could be adopted into Ethiopia. There's a great deal of hydroelectric energy. It's very cheap energy in Ethiopia. So that model I think is very good. I would like to say any students listening, log into Kala, Qala. It's a program led by Abu Bakr and some, core contributors of Bitcoin. But that's a great place to, learn about kind of the technical developments of Bitcoin, and potentially get a job in Bitcoin, right? And for those that are in the gig economy, those that are, graphic designers and X, Y, and Z, they can log into Sost, S-O-S-T .tech. That's kind of an Ethiopian built platform for gig work, and you can get paid in Bitcoin. So, I think all of these developments will continue to happen, and I'm excited for the ride.
Kal Kassa, once again, I really appreciate you taking time to have this Bitcoin conversation. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you so much, Daudu.
Thank you.